For years, Jim had tried to leave his paranormal investigating days behind. After his wife died, he wanted nothing more than a quiet, normal life. But fate had other plans for Jim. On a sunny Saturday in late September, Jim was reading the paper when he saw the headlines, "Jersey Devil Terrorizes Pine Barrens." Over the past few weeks, several hikers had gone missing in the 1.1 million acre Pine Barrens forest of New Jersey. Some who ventured into the woods returned with tales of a winged, horned creature that stalked them. Though most dismissed them as crazy, Jim knew better. The Jersey Devil, a legendary creature said to inhabit the Pine Barrens, was real. And it was Jim's job to stop it. With a heavy sigh, Jim opened the old chest in his basement. Inside was all his old paranormal investigating equipment. EMF detectors, infrared cameras, spirit boxes. He hadn't touched any of it since his wife's death, 5 years ago. Running his fingers over the cold metal tools, memories flooded Jim's mind. The late nights in graveyards, the adrenaline rush of ghost hunts, the pride of helping tormented spirits find peace. In the wake of his wife's passing, Jim had convinced himself it was all nonsense. But as he looked at the missing persons reports, he knew that Jersey Devil was no nonsense at all. It was something very real and very dangerous. After gathering his equipment, Jim got in his old blue pickup and started driving towards the Pine Barrens. As the urban landscape faded away and the thick woods emerged around him, unease settled in Jim's gut. It had been a long time since he'd done this. He didn't even know where to start looking for the Jersey Devil. Passing a lonely roadside bar, he decided to stop and ask the locals if they'd seen anything strange. Inside, the place was dimly lit and nearly empty. The few patrons stared as Jim walked up to the bartender and started asking questions. They laughed and dismissed him as a crazy old kook. As Jim turned to leave, a gruff voice spoke up from the end of the bar. "I believe you. Saw that Jersey Devil myself just the other night." Jim turned to see an unkempt older man gesturing him over. As Jim approached, the man introduced himself as Russ. Russ said he came to the Pine Barrens often to hunt, and late one night last week, something terrifying crossed his path. The creature walked on 2 legs, but had dark fur, giant bat-like wings, horns, and a long spiked tail. It screamed an unearthly wail that curdled Russ's blood. Russ was convinced it was the legendary Jersey Devil. No one had believed his story, but Russ was willing to take Jim to the spot where he saw the beast. Having the first real lead on the creature's whereabouts, Jim readily agreed. As the 2 men got in Jim's truck and drove towards the dark forest, Jim felt the familiar adrenaline pumping through his veins. The hunt was on. Russ directed Jim to a remote clearing deep in the woods. As soon as they stepped out of the truck, the air felt heavier. The trees swayed slightly, though there was no wind. It was as if the forest itself had come alive. Russ led Jim to the edge of the clearing where the creature had emerged. The vegetation was crushed, and claw marks marred several trees. Jim ran his hand over the gashes. They were far bigger than any bear or mountain lion. He placed a wildlife camera in a nearby tree to capture any activity. Russ wished Jim luck as he left to get home before nightfall. Alone as darkness descended, Jim waited and watched the woods carefully. With each snap of a branch or rustle of leaves, his pulse quickened. Then finally, he heard it. A bone-chilling screech that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jim's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the woods with his night vision camera. There, between the trees, a dark shape glided by. It moved unnaturally, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes scuttling low on 4. Parking his truck in the clearing was a mistake, Jim realized, as the creature could easily sneak up on him. Peering through the window, the hulking form of the Jersey Devil crept towards the truck. It scraped a claw down the side, emitting an unearthly wail. Jim fumbled for his keys and slammed the truck into drive. He sped down the dirt forest roads as fast as he could. Checking the rearview mirror, he could see it emerging from the woods, spreading its gigantic wings. Jim knew he needed help. This was beyond anything he'd faced before. When the morning sun rose, he drove straight to the nearest police station. But would they believe his wild story? As Jim recounted his terrifying tale to the chief of police, he could see the skepticism written on the man's face. The missing persons cases were troubling, the chief admitted. But a flying devil monster? He thought Jim was just an eccentric, glorified ghost hunter. Jim desperately showed him the proof. The photos from the wildlife cam that captured the creature's glowing eyes, the long gashes down the side of his truck. Finally, the chief's face reflected shock and a tinge of fear. This was beyond just animals or pranks. People were in danger. He agreed to gather a search party to hunt down the Jersey Devil once and for all. As Jim walked out of the station, he breathed a sigh of relief. The police were on his side and he had evidence now to back up his claims. Feeling more confident, Jim stopped by the local university on his way home. He knew just who to recruit for help on this case. Dr. Anna Bell was one of the folklore professors at the university. Jim had worked with her before. As an expert on myths and legends, Anna would be able to provide unique insight into the Jersey Devil. When Jim arrived, she was in the middle of a lecture, but her curiosity was piqued when she saw how distressed he looked. In her office, Jim explained the situation and showed her the photos. Her academic fascination turned to real fear. This creature was far worse than the legend. According to the stories, it was violent, but could be warded off by noise. But this devil was hunting people in broad daylight. They hypothesized it must be desperate for food as urban sprawl encroached on its territory. Together with the police, Anna agrees to help Jim catch the Jersey Devil and get it away from people. As they strategize into the night, Jim feels his purpose renewed. With Anna's knowledge and the authorities on board, he felt hopeful again about stopping this monster and saving lives. Early the next morning, Jim picked up supplies from his basement to prep for the coming hunt. Anna knocked on his door, carrying large, detailed maps of the Pine Barrens. She had marked all the recent attacks and believable encounters with the Jersey Devil over the past century. A clear hot zone emerged that would be their starting point. As they drove out to the woods, Jim was impressed by how eager Anna was to see the creature in person and study it up close. Usually he had to work alone. Having Anna's partnership buoyed his spirits. At the trailhead, they met up with the chief of police and his men. The air was tense as the search party scanned the silent, dense woods. There were still a few hours till dusk when the creature seemed to appear. Gripping his tranquilizer gun, Jim hoped they could subdue it quickly once it emerged. Until then, they aimed to follow its tracks and get as close as possible to its lair. But in this vast ancient forest, that was easier said than done. The search party walked for hours without spotting a single track or trace of the Jersey Devil. The abundance of leaves, moss, and vegetation made the forest floor like a complex mosaic, with no discernible paths. But Jim knew these woods intimately, having explored them many times before. As twilight neared, the group approached a shadowy, fetid section of forest. The stench of rotting vegetation and bog water hung heavy in the humid air. Jim recognized it as the ideal habitat for the Jersey Devil, secluded and primal. The bog-like wetlands were once ubiquitous to the Pine Barrens, but had been slowly disappearing due to drainage pipes and suburban development. These isolated locales were where the creature likely retreated to. Just then, Anna noticed a disturbance in the muddy bank ahead. Approaching cautiously, they saw an unmistakable large footprint with 3 long, prominent claw marks sunk deep into the mud. Broken branches and trampled grass formed a trail into the dark heart of the swamp. They were on the right path. Jim's heart raced as the sun disappeared below the horizon, blanketing the woods in shadow. The creature would be emerging soon to hunt. Signaling to Anna and the police chief, they switched on their heavy-duty, shoulder-mounted floodlights, piercing the gloom. The 3 formed a wide perimeter around the secluded wetland, boots sinking into the muddy earth. Through the dense trees, Jim thought he heard the faint, keening screech of the Jersey Devil somewhere in the distance. The woods went silent and still. Not even a chirp or rustle. Even the normally stoic police chief looked unnerved. Suddenly, a nearby bush violently shook and trembled. Jim swung his blinding floodlight towards it. Hunched low in the brush, almost invisible, a large, hulking form crouched, eyes flashing red in the stark light. The creature unleashed an unearthly, deafening wail that cut through the night. The Jersey Devil took 2 lumbering steps out of the bushes, woody branches snapping under its weight. This was their chancey. Jim steadied his tranquilizer rifle and fired, striking the creature in the neck before it could retreat into the shadows. It howled in fury, thrashing wildly for several moments before collapsing to the damp ground, sedated. They had done it, but the tranquilizer wouldn't last long on a beast this size. They needed to work quickly to contain it safely. Approaching the fallen creature, Jim was momentarily paralyzed by the nightmarish sight. The Jersey Devil's muscular reptilian body was covered in coarse, scraggly black fur, slick with bog water. Its taloned claws, each as long as a man's hand, dug into the mud as the sedative began wearing off. The beast's crimson eyes flew open, glowing with rage. As it writhed and snapped its maw, Jim jumped back instinctively. The police chief and his men quickly moved in, binding the creature's jaws shut with ropes and restraining its powerful limbs. It thrashed violently, straining against its bonds as muffled screams of fury escaped its throat. Jim knew they needed to transport it deep into the old-growth woods, where it could not reach any human settlements. He called in an old friend named Caleb who owned a wildlife sanctuary prepared for such creatures. As Caleb's large truck arrived, the entire search party worked together to carefully load the sedated beast into the covered bed. Turning to Anna, Jim saw her eyes alight with exhilaration. Together, they had solved a century-old mystery. And though part of Jim's heart would always belong to ghost hunting, capturing the Jersey Devil had reawakened his passion for protecting the innocent. In the weeks that followed, Jim was proud to see the news of the captured Jersey Devil go nationwide. Tourism to the Pine Barrens surged as people hoped to catch a glimpse of the mythical creature. Better surveillance and patrols were implemented for the woods, and search and rescue teams were on higher alert. No one wanted any further disappearing campers or hikers. Jim knew the tale of the Jersey Devil would go down in Pine Barrens legend and be retold for decades to come. He and Anna published their official report on the beast, with Anna's biological analysis and sketches alongside Jim's first-hand accounts, though he turned down every TV interview offered, preferring to keep a low profile. He was grateful to tell his story in hopes it would help future encounters with the unknown.